The Plagues of Egypt is a biblical story that recounts the punishments sent to Egypt by God to force the release of the Hebrew people from slavery. But besides pushing for the freedom of the Hebrew people, the plagues also serve to prove that the Egyptian gods didn't exist or were weak compared to the God of the Bible. Today we'll explore what each of these plagues signified and which Egyptian culture or belief they challenged. 1. Waters turning into blood. Really, this first plague was as if someone had entered the Gods of Egypt game server and started blatantly cheating, turning the divine leaderboard upside down. The Nile, this great river that was basically the main avenue of ancient Egypt, where everyone went to drink a glass of water, wash their clothes, or just worship a little, suddenly turns into the setting of a horror movie. Red blood in the River of Wonders. Hapi, the god of the Nile, in essence, was the guy who ensured that Egypt would not become a desert of sand and heat stroke. When its waters turned to blood and the fish began to float rather than swim, you can imagine the panic. It was as if someone had said, you think you have control over nature? Hold it then. For the Egyptians, who practically invented versatility when it comes to gods, seeing one of your top gods taking a hit of this magnitude was, without a doubt, a shock. Wow, we worship fish, and now they're all floating around dead? This goes against our entire diet and religion. This plague was not only a blow to Egyptian agriculture and economy, but also to their spiritual ego. Imagine you every day making offerings to ensure that everything goes well, and suddenly your local god is displaced by a god who is not even from your regional league of deities. It's the kind of thing that makes you rethink your spiritual choices. And of course, this was just the opening of the 10 Plagues show. 2. Frogs. Frogs were sacred animals to the Egyptians, and one of their idols, the goddess Heket, had a frog's head. They supposed that she possessed creative power. Although the main purpose of this plague was to punish Israel's oppressors, it would also attract contempt for their many pagan gods. The great multiplication of frogs made the goddess Heket appear evil. Imagine you are an ancient Egyptian waking up one fine morning ready to worship your favorite goddess Heket when you suddenly realize that your house is more full of frogs than furniture. Good morning, goddess Heket. I didn't know you were having a surprise party here. Frogs, once seen as sacred and a symbol of creation, are now like that distant relative who shows up uninvited and decides to stay indefinitely. It could be said that the Egyptians were facing a divine dilemma. On the one hand, there was respect and veneration for Heket, the frog-headed goddess who legends say had creative powers. On the other, the reality of living with a number of frogs that would make anyone reconsider their choice of idols. Dear Heket, I think we can talk about limits. We're loving the devotion, but I think you overdid it with the number of frogs. 3. Lice infestation. The third plague. A moment that certainly made everyone in Egypt itch in discomfort, literally and figuratively. Imagine the scene. You're there, trying to recover from the invasion of frogs that decided to turn your house into the stage for an amphibious reality show. And then, what happens? Lice. And we're not talking about a little itch here and there. We're talking about an infestation on a divine scale. Now, what are we going to do? Shampoo hasn't been invented yet. And of course, Pharaoh, in his infinite wisdom, thinks, no problem, I have my trusted magicians here. They managed to turn water into blood, right? Lice must be a piece of cake. But then the wizards hit a supernatural wall and for the first time have to admit, this is the finger of God. That must have been a blow to the ego. You mean we can't just do a magic trick and solve this? Does anyone have the number of a good divine exterminator? Also, there was this god called Thoth, who was credited with creating knowledge, wisdom, art, and magic. The ironic thing here is that Thoth was there, probably scratching his head, along with the rest of his body, thinking, well, this is embarrassing. I'm the god of wisdom and I didn't see this coming. I'm the god of creation and I can't create something like this. Someone will update my LinkedIn. The turning point of the third plague was one of those mic drop moments in biblical history. 4. Flies. The fourth plague consisted of swarms of flies that would infest all of Egypt. A new element is introduced from this plague, the distinction between the Egyptians and the worshippers of the true God. That's when Egypt basically became the most exclusive hotspot for flies in all of antiquity. Just imagine the conversation between the flies. I heard that Egypt has an incredible vibe right now, totally open to visitors. Shall we go? And so, a cloud of winged tourists decided to check into Egyptian lands, completely ignoring the Goshen area. Probably because someone forgot to include it in the tour guide. Yes, this was the point where the distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites became crystal clear, showing that the God of Israel was not a localized entity, but one with authority and power over everything and everyone. Now imagine Pharaoh, already angry about the unusual pest control practices that weren't working, seeing this. Well, that's embarrassing. Are my local deities on vacation or what? And meanwhile, the Israelites in Goshen were probably lighting candles not out of necessity, but to celebrate the fact that for the first time in a long time, they could have a picnic without being interrupted. 5. Plague on oxen and cows. The fifth plague arrives, and it seems like we are seeing a divine tendency here, right? This time, the target was Egyptian livestock, and let's face it, if you were a cow in ancient Egypt, you'd probably start to question your life choices at this point. Hey Apis, Hathor Nut, a little help here maybe? But unfortunately for the Egyptian cattle, divine help was in short supply. This plague is not just an agricultural crisis, it's practically a direct attack on the heart of the Egyptian gods. Apis, the bovine god of Memphis, known for his herd fertility skills, was probably there, checking his notifications and thinking, well, this is going to be hard to explain. Hathor, the celestial cow goddess, and Nut, sometimes depicted as a cow symbolizing heaven, were also not having the best of days. Imagine Pharaoh waking up to the news. What do you mean all the herd died? What about the gods? Are they on strike or something? Meanwhile, on the Israelite side, not a sheep was lost. Our sheep are so healthy that they look like they've gone on a spiritual retreat, they must have thought. Looking with sympathy, or perhaps a slight air of superiority at their Egyptian neighbors. 6. Wounds on the Egyptians. Even here, the Egyptian magicians were present when the miracles were performed. Although they had reproduced some false imitations using occult sciences, on this occasion the plague fell on them with such severity that they could not continue with the king. The situation of Egyptian magicians at the time of the plagues is kind of the ancient equivalent of, "It's just a trick, guys, calm down," quickly followed by, "Oops, wait, this is too serious, I'm out." These magicians, who until then were considering themselves to be the great illusionists of the Nile, capable of facing Moses and Aaron in a battle of tricks, suddenly find themselves in a situation that not even the best manual of occult sciences could resolve. Oh, and there was also a challenge to Isis, the ancient Egyptian deity known for her skill in healing and medicine. When the plagues began to reach levels that no one could diagnose, the Egyptians must have rushed to Isis hoping for a last-minute miracle. Something like, "Goddess, we have a problem that even Google can't solve." 7. Stone rain. In the 7th plague, the god of Israel decided to show off his meteorological skills, sending a rain of stones that would leave any weather forecast app confused. Here, the confrontation went to Reshpu, the Egyptian god who managed the weather, winds, and thunder. It was he who decided whether the plantation would be well watered or not, as well as controlling environmental disasters and everything else. Meanwhile, the Egyptians, used to relying on Reshpu for good and safe weather, found themselves in the midst of climate chaos that no umbrella or damage insurance could cope with. Far from being just an inconvenience, this storm of rocks was a direct message. The Egyptian gods, so venerated and trusted, were in reality under the authority of the God of Israel. 8. Locusts. When the locusts invaded Egypt, it was basically a "where's Min now" moment. After the hail, you'd think it was bad enough. But then comes a cloud of locusts so thick it probably turned day into night. Min, the god of fertility and protector of crops, must have taken too long a nap, because his only job was to prevent this kind of agricultural disaster. And let's not forget Shu, the air god, and Shebek, the insect god, who also failed miserably to protect Egypt. This plague not only left the Egyptians questioning the effectiveness of their agricultural gods, but also showed that Yahweh had complete control over nature, turning the once fertile land into a buffet for locusts. A true display of divine power and a reminder that when it comes to protecting crops, it might be good to have the creator of the universe on your side. 9. Total darkness. In a bold move, the 9th plague put Ra and Horus, two heavyweights of the Egyptian pantheon, in the hot seat. The Egyptians believed that every night they fought against the serpent Apophis so that the sun could rise again the next day. If the sun rose, it meant they had won another night. And well, since the sun always rose, they had never lost a single battle. But for the first time in history, the sun did not rise for 3 days in a row, and that could only mean one thing in the minds of the Egyptians. Ra and Horus had not only lost their battles, but were probably already dead. A very humorous way for the God of Israel to say that he had dominion over the earth and heavens. Meanwhile, the Hebrews enjoyed light in their homes as if nothing was happening. This episode not only questioned the competence of Ra and Horus as celestial sun protectors, but also slapped the face of Egyptian worship, which for centuries had placed the sun god at the top of their favorite deity list. The message was clear. In the duel for the title of the true sun god, the winner had just overshadowed the competition. 10. Death of the firstborn. In the 10th plague, it seems the God of Israel decided to do a clean sweep of Egypt's firstborn, including the livestock, which was probably wondering what it had done to make the list. The pharaoh, until then confident in his self-declared divinity and the eternal life insurance provided by the sons of Ra, found himself in a very earthly predicament, his kingdom in mourning and despair. While he probably revisited his notes on how to be a less mortal god, he also had to swallow his pride and chase after the Hebrew leaders, the same ones he swore he never wanted to see again. Hey, remember me? Pharaoh? So, about that leaving thing, could you please? Oh, and take whatever you want. Oh, and bless me too, okay? It was a twist worthy of a soap opera with the God of Israel signing his name in the sky as the true executive producer of the universe, while Pharaoh and his gods were left looking like they just discovered their powers were more limited than they thought. And so, with a mix of divine tragedy and comedy, the Hebrews' journey to freedom began, leaving behind an Egypt that would surely never forget that last night of festivities.